Hello everyone. In this lecture, we are going to review all the topics which have been covered in different modules of number theory. So let us start. So first of all, we had covered the divisibility theory in integers, and in that chapter we have done Euclid algorithm. So what is Euclidean algorithm? It is the division algorithm which is to be repeated again and again. So Euclidean algorithm is nothing but it is a repeated application of division algorithm. And how does it work? So we use this Euclidean algorithm to find the GCD of two numbers. So suppose we have these two numbers. So I'm going to find the GCD of these two numbers using this algorithm. So this is called the long division method, which we all know. So what we do in this, the bigger number is inside, it's the dividend, and the smaller is the divisor. So we just divide it until we find a zero remainder, and the last non-zero remainder, it becomes the greatest common divisor of two numbers. So in a Euclidean algorithm, we are just writing these steps like this. So in first step, what we are doing, we are just dividing 12378 by 3054. So that means this dividend can be written as divisor into quotient plus remainder. So that thing here. And in step 2, we are dividing 3054 by 162. So here 3054 can be written as 162 into 18 plus the remainder. So this thing we are doing till the last step. So the last non-zero remainder, that is the GCD. So here 6 becomes the GCD of these two numbers. So just this thing, writing all these steps in this form, this is called the Euclidean algorithm. And as you know that GCD can be written as a linear combination of given two numbers. So that is also done using Euclidean algorithm, but that is reverse Euclidean algorithm. So in that, what we do, we just write 6 as 24 minus 18, and then substitute the value of 18 from this step, and then just substitute the value of 24 from this step, and we go in this direction. So that is reverse Euclidean. So let us see what we are doing here. So 6 is 24 minus 18 into 1, then put the value of 18 here. So just solve it, and then in next step substitute the value of 24 from the previous step. So this thing we are doing, in the end you will find that you have the combination of the given two numbers 12378 and 3054. So this is the value of x and y such that GCD is equal to ax plus b1. So Euclidean algorithm is used to find the GCD of given two numbers, and when we just use the reverse Euclidean algorithm, then you can write GCD as a combination of given two numbers. Then we have covered Diophantine equation. So what is Diophantine equation? An equation which is to be solved for integers and it is in one or more unknowns. That is called the Diophantine equation. So this is the simplest linear Diophantine equation in two variables. So here this example we have taken 3x plus 6y is equal to 18. So we are solving this, and there are three solutions of this equation. First is this, when we take x4 and y is 1, and this is also the solution, x is minus 6, y is 6, and here. So we have these three solutions, and this is another Diophantine equation which has no solution, because in the left hand side you take any integer value of x and y, you will find even integer, and in the right hand side there is odd, so they cannot be equal. That means this equation has no solution. So, a Diophantine equation may have a solution or may not have a solution, or it may have more than one solution. That means you should know what are the conditions under which a Diophantine equation is solvable. So, let us see this result. So, here a linear Diophantine equation ax plus by is equal to c has a solution if and only if d divides c, where d is GCD of a and b. So if x naught y naught is any particular solution of the given equation, then the other solutions are given by x is equal to x naught plus b by d into t, y is equal to y naught minus a by d into t. Here t is any arbitrary integer. So this is the result which we use to find the solution of a linear Diophantine equation. It is very important and useful. So we are going to use this result here in this problem. So let's see this problem. Here a farmer purchased 100 head of livestock for a total of $4,000, and these were the prices: $120 for each calf, $50 for each lamb, and $25 for each piglet. So if the farmer obtained at least one animal of each type, then how many of each did he buy? That we have to find. So suppose that C is the number of calves, L is the number of lambs, P is the number of piglets bought. So and the total number of livestock he has taken is 100. So C plus L plus P is 100, and CLP, all these three are greater than equal to 1 because he has to buy at least one of each. So and then next, you have been given the cost. So 120 for calf. So if C is the number of calves, then total cost will be 120 C. And if L is the number of lambs, then total cost will be 50 L. And if P is the number of piglets bought, then 25 P will be the cost for piglets. So if we add all, then we get the total cost 4,000. So that we have done here. And then you can just divide it by 5 and you get this equation number 2. So from 1, we can find that P is equal to 100 minus C minus L. So just substitute this value into second and you will find the equation in two variables. So this is a linear Diophantine equation in two variables which can be solved by the result which we have shown. So for this equation, this is the particular solution 0, 60. So you find the value of x naught y naught from here. So if you know x naught y naught, then you can find the value of x and y. So here x and y are C and L. So C is 0. This is x naught plus 5 by 1 into t. So this is a by d into t. So we find this c is equal to 5t and L is equal to y naught minus d by d into t. So this becomes 60 minus 19t. So you have C and L. Then you can substitute the value of C and L here. Then you can find the value of P. So all are the values of C and P in the form of T. And all these three are greater than equal to 1. So simultaneously they have to greater than equal to 1. So from here we find t greater than equal to 1. From here t less than equal to 3. From here t greater than equal to minus 2. So that means t lies between 1 and 3, including 1 and 3. So for t is equal to 1, you have this solution. For t is equal to 2, you have this solution. For t is equal to 3, you have this solution. So these are the three possibilities to buy. So this is the Diophantine equation. Next, we have taken fundamental theorem of arithmetic. So what is fundamental theorem of arithmetic? It says that every positive integer n which is greater than 1, that is either a prime or it can be written as a product of prime or as a power of prime. And that representation is unique apart from the order in which the factors occur. So because that order doesn't matter. So for example, 20 is 2 into 2 into 5 and it can also be written 5 into 2 into 2. So these both are same. The order, it doesn't affect your number. So next, this is a corollary and that any positive integer n greater than 1 can be written uniquely in this canonical form, that is the powers of product of primes. So p1 to the power k1, p2 to the power k2, pr to the power kr, where p1, p2, pr, they are in increasing order and they all are distinct. For example, the 360, it can be written as 2 cube into 3 square into 5. So this is your P1, this is P2, this is P3. This is K1, K2, and K3 is 1. Similarly, these are the canonical forms of these numbers. Next is the sieve of Eratosthenes. So what is sieve of Eratosthenes? In this, you just write a range, a limited range of numbers, suppose from 1 to 100. Then you find the prime numbers from all those numbers. That is, you sieve the primes from that larger group. So what is the method that we use? So we write down the integers 2 to n in their natural order and then systematically eliminate all the composite numbers by striking out all the multiples of 2p, 3p, 4p. So then the thing which you are left with, that will be the primes. So let us see here. So 2 to 100, then 2 is a prime number. So all the multiples of 2 will not be prime. So just cross them out. And then 3 is a prime. All the multiple of 3 are not prime. So cross them. So when you cross all the multiples of primes, then finally you will be left with the primes. So this is the sieve of Eratosthenes. Next is the Goldbach conjecture. So in 1742, the Prussian mathematician Christian Goldbach wrote a letter to Leonhard Euler in which he proposed this conjecture that every even integer greater than 2 is the sum of two prime numbers, like this. And this is another statement for that every even integer greater than 4 can be written as the sum of two odd primes. So these are odd primes. So every even integer greater than 4 is written as the sum of two odd primes. Here what we were saying, two prime numbers. So 2 is also included here, that is not included. So this is just the modification of that statement. So the conjecture has been tested up to 4 into 10 to the power 14. It is not proved yet. So it is just a conjecture yet. Holbeck's conjecture is one of the oldest unsolved problems in number theory and in all of the mathematics. And next we have congruent. So as we know, the congruence concept was given by Carl Friedrich Gauss, and he laid the foundation of modern number theory. So how do we define a congruence? Two numbers a and b are said to be congruent to each other, modern if n divides a minus, or you can say a minus b can be written as n into k for some k. These are some of the properties of congruence. So first is like this: A is congruent to B mod n if and only if A and B leave the same remainder when divided by n. Any number A is congruent to itself. If A is congruent to B, that means B is congruent to A also. A is congruent to B and B is congruent to C implies that A is congruent to C. A congruent to B, C congruent to D, then A plus C is congruent to B plus D, and AC is congruent to BD. That means you can add and multiply the respective sides. So, and if A is congruent to B mod n, then A plus C, B plus C mod n, they are congruent, and AC and BC, they are also congruent mod n. And if A is congruent to B mod n, then if you take the any kth power of these two numbers, then they are also congruent mod n. So then linear congruence, an equation of this form, A is congruent to B. This is called linear congruence. And how do we solve a linear congruence? So you can see that this congruence, it if you want to find the solution of this linear congruence, then you have to find the solution of a Diophantine equation. Why these two things are connected? Let us see. So Ax is congruent to B mod n. That means n divides Ax minus B. That means you can write Ax minus B as n into y for some y integer, and then you take ny this side and b right hand side. So you just find the Diophantine equation here. So you already know how to find a solution of Diophantine equation. That means finding solution of a linear congruence is same as finding solution of this Diophantine equation. So that means these two are connected. Next is this result. The linear congruence X congruent to B mod n has a solution if and only D divides B, where D is the GCD of A and N. And if D divides B, then there are D mutually incongruent solutions. And if A and N, they are relatively prime, that is GCD is 1, then there exists only one solution, the unique solution. This is Chinese remainder theorem, and it is used to find the simultaneous solution of a system of congruences. So let us see what is Chinese remainder theorem. So if n1 and 2 and r are positive integers, each relatively prime to each other, then this system, x is congruent to a1 mod n1, x congruent to a2 mod n2, x congruent to ar mod n. Then this system has a solution, a simultaneous solution, which is a unique modulo integer n1 and 2 and r. So next is Fermat's theorem. Fermat's theorem, it says that let p be prime and p does not divide a, then a to the power p minus 1 is congruent to 1 mod p. This is one of the important theorem in number theory, and we use it to just simplify the calculations when we have to calculate the largest powers of a number. Next is Wilson's theorem. So it says that factorial p minus 1. Here p is a prime number, then factorial p minus 1 is congruent to minus 1 mod p. Then comes the number theoretic function. So what is a number theoretic function? Any function whose domain of definition is the set of positive integers, that is a number theoretic function. And what is the value of a number theoretic function? It need not be a positive integer or even an integer, but most of the numbers that we are going to see here, that will have integer value. So this is number theoretic function. These two are number theoretic functions. So first is tau n, the number of positive divisors of n. If you have n is equal to 12, then these are the divisors of 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12. They are 6 in number. So tau 12 has value 6. This is sigma n. Sigma n, the sum of divisors of n. So for 12, what will be sigma n? That is the sum of all these numbers. That is 28. This is the result regarding these two number theory function tau n and sigma n. So if n is in this canonical form, then tau n will be this, and sigma n will be this. They are used when the number is given in canonical form, and they are very important formulas. Then you have multiplicative functions. So if you have two number theoretic functions, if you have a one single number theoretic function f and mn are relatively prime, then f of mn is equal to fm into fn. If this holds, then we say that f is a multiplicative function. So the function which we have seen just now, tau and sigma, they both are multiplicative. And whenever there is a function and you want to prove that it is a multiplicative function, then you just show this thing, fmn is equal to fm into fn, where m and n are relatively prime. Next is Mobius mu function. So how do we define a Mobius mu function? This is written as mu n, and it is like has value 1 if n is 1, value 0 when p square divides n for some prime p, minus 1 to the power r if n is equal to p1 to pr, they are distinct primes. So if you have, so as you know, for n is equal to 1, mu n is 1. For n is equal to 2, so 2 comes here in this case. So 2 is a prime number, so n is equal to 2. So 2 is the single prime, that means minus 1 to the power 1. So mu 2 will be minus 1. And for 6, n is equal to 6. 6 can be written as 2 into 3. That means we have two prime numbers. So minus 1 to the power 2. So that will be value 1. And mu 4, what is mu 4? Because 4 is can be written as 2 square. That means 2 square divides n. So mu 4 will be 0. So this is how you find the value of Mobius mu function. This is a formula, or you can say this is the result which you can use when you have to find the summation of all the values of mu d, where d runs through the divisors of n. Then summation mu d is 1 if n is equal to 1, and if it is greater than 1, then it has value 0. Next, this is another number theoretic function. This is Euler phi function. It denotes the number of positive integers less than n and relatively prime to n. So if n is 30, then all the numbers which are less than 30 and relatively prime to 30, they are 8. So mu 30 is 8. Phi n is n minus 1 when n is prime. Because all the numbers which are less than n, they will be prime to n. This is the formula to calculate the value of phi n. So if p is a prime, then phi of p to the power k. Here n is p to the power k. So as we know that any number which is greater than 1 can be written as the power of prime. So if n is p to the power k, then phi p to the power k will be p to the power k minus p to the power k minus 1. And if you take p to the power k common, then it becomes p to the power k 1 minus 1 upon p. So this is phi p to the power k. Then there is its generalization also if you have product of powers of prime. So p to the power k1, p1, p2 to the power k2. Then you just have different factors, p1 to the power k1, 1 minus 1 upon p1, and p2 to the power k2, 1 minus 1 upon p2, like that. So these are two more results. Here we are saying that given two integers a, b, c, where a and b, c, they are relatively prime, then this is true if and only a and b are relatively prime, as well as a and c, they has to be relatively prime. The function phi is also a multiplicative function. So this is the result that we were talking about. If n is in this canonical form, then you have this because if you take p1 to the power k1 common from here, and p2 to the power k2 from here, and so on, then that thing collectively will become n. So this is phi n, and for n greater than 2, phi n is an even integer. This is another important lemma. This will be used in different results. So it says that if n is greater than 1 and a and n are relatively prime, and e1, e2, an, they are positive integers less than n and relatively prime to n, then a1, ae2, ae phi n, they are congruent modulo into a1 into a phi n. Next, we have Euler's theorem. So if n is greater than or equal to 1 and a and n are relatively prime, then a to the power phi n, that is congruent to 1 mod n. This is another important feature of function phi n, that is what is the value of sum of values of phi d as d ranges over the positive divisors of n. So when you just add all the values of phi d where d is the divisor of n, then it is equal to n. So this is Gauss theorem. Summation phi d is equal to n, and just says that if n is greater than 1, the sum of the positive integers less than n and relatively prime to 1, that is a1 plus a2 plus a phi n, this is equal to 1 upon 2 n phi n. Then we have taken Mobius inversion formula. So you have two number theoretic function, capital F and small f, related by this formula. Fn is equal to summation fd, d divides n. Then this f can be found by this result. Fn is equal to summation mu d fn by d. So this is your mu function, Mobius mu function, and this is equal to summation mu n by d fd. So we can say that any number theoretic function can be expressed in the terms of its sum function. The order of an integer modulo n. So how do we find the order of an integer modulo n? So before that, let's just see this theorem, Euler's theorem. So Euler's theorem says that a to the power phi n is congruent to 1 mod n whenever a and n are relatively prime. Let's see the definition now. Let n is greater than 1 when a and n are relatively prime. The order of a mod n is the smallest positive integer k such that a to the power k is congruent to 1 mod n. So here we have a to the power phi n congruent to 1 mod n. And here we are saying that k is the smallest positive integer. That means it can be less than phi n also. So, for example, here we have found the order of 2 and mod 7. So 2 to the power 3 becomes congruent to 1 mod 7. But again 2 to the power 6 is also congruent to 1. But because this 3 is the least, so we can say that the order of 2 is 3 mod 7. Next we have this, if two integers are congruent, then they have same order modulo n. And whenever we talk about the order of an integer modulo n, then you have to assume that a and n are relatively prime. In order of any integral power of a in terms of order of a. So if you already know the order of a, and that is k mod n, then what is the order of a to the power h? Then order of a to the power h will be order of k upon GCD of h and k. This is an important result. Now what happens if a has the largest order possible? And largest order, that means by Euler's theorem that largest power is phi n. So what happens if a is the largest order possible? Then we call it a primitive root. So let us see primitive root definition. If GCD of a and n is 1 and a is of order phi n mod n, then a is a primitive root of the integer n, or we can say that a to the power phi n is congruent to 1 mod n, but a to the power k is not congruent to 1 mod n for all positive integers k less than phi n. So when this holds, then we say that a is a primitive root of integer n, means a has order phi n. So here 3 is a primitive root of 7. You can see that 3, 5, 7, because 7 is prime, so 5, 7 is 6, and 3 has order 6. So this is results 3, and it says that a and n are relatively prime, and a1, a2, a5 n are positive integers less than n and relatively prime to n. And if a is the primitive root of n, then a square, a cube, a to the power phi n, they are congruent mod n to a1, a2, a phi n in some order. So this is another important result. This is the corollary to that result. If n is a primitive root, then it has exactly phi of phi n. So you want to find, if you want to find how many primitive roots are there, then just find this one, phi of phi. Then we have this Lagrange's theorem. It is used to find the number of solutions of a polynomial congruence. So if you have this polynomial congruence, a n x to the power n plus a n minus 1 x to the power n minus 1 and so on, a to a1x plus a0, where a0 is n is not congruent to 0. So this is the polynomial congruence, which is of degree n greater than equal to 1. And with integer coefficients, then this congruence, fx congruent to 0 mod p, it has at the most n integrate in incongruent solution. That means the number of solution is equal to the degree of this polynomial. So it has at the most n incongruent solutions modulo p. This is the corollary say that if p is a prime, then there are exactly 5p minus 1 incongruent primitive roots of p. And this result says that for k greater than or equal to 3, the integer 2 to the power k has no primitive. So if you have integer of this form, then you can straightforward say that it has no primitive root where k has value greater than or equal to 3. It says that the result says that if m and n are relatively prime and m and n both are greater than 2, then the integer mn has no primitive root. So here we are just seeing different result where you have been given numbers of different forms where they do not have any primitive root. Now, the integer n fails to have a primitive root if either n is divisible by 2 odd primes or n is of this form 2 to the power n p to the power k, where n is greater than or equal to 2. Next, we have quadratic residue. So, let p be an odd and a and b the relatively prime. And if the quadratic congruence x square congruent to a mod p has a solution, then a is said to be the quadratic residue. I repeat, if this congruence x square congruent to a mod p has a solution, then a is said to be a quadratic residue of p. Otherwise, a is called a quadratic non-residue of p. If that means if it doesn't have any solution, then a is quadratic non-residue. Next criteria for quadratic residue, it is given by Euler, so it's called Euler's criteria. Let p be odd prime and a and p are the relatively prime. So then a is quadratic residue of p if and only if a to the power p minus 1 upon 2 is congruent to 1. So this is if and only if condition. So if you want to find the quadratic residue of a prime p, then you just check this a to the power p minus 1 upon 2. If it is congruent to 1 upon 2, then you say that a is a quadratic residue of p. This corollary says that let p be an odd prime and a and p they are relatively prime. Then is a quadratic a is a quadratic residue or non-residue of p according to whether a to the power p minus 1 upon 2 congruent to 1 mod p or a to the power p minus 1 upon 2 congruent to minus 1 mod p. So when it is congruent to 1 mod p, then it is quadratic residue, and if it is congruent to minus 1, then A is quadratic non-residue of P. Next, we have Legendre symbol. So, what is Legendre symbol? It was given by Euler, and let us just see this thing. Euler studied on quadratic residues were further developed by French mathematician Legendre. So, quadratic residues they were studied by Eulers, but later the study was further developed by another mathematician Legendre. And many things get simplified when we use a particular symbol for a certain thing. So for Legendre symbol also there is this symbol which is written like this within bracket a slash p, or you can say a upon p, a object p. So this is not like that division, but it is written like this a upon p. So there are some other symbols also for this uh, Legendre symbol, like you can write like this a upon p, or like this also. You can use any symbol. So how to define this Legendre symbol? How to find the value of the symbol? So A upon P, this has value 1 if A is a quadratic residue of P, and this has value minus 1 if A is a quadratic non-residue. And when we say that A is a quadratic residue of P, when x square is congruent to A mod P has a solution. So that means x square congruent to A mod P, if this has solution, then A upon P has value 1. And if that congruence doesn't have a solution, then A upon P has value 1, minus 1, sorry. So this is an example. Here P is 13, and we already know that quadratic residue of 13 are 1, 3, 4, 9, 10, 12, and non-residues are 2, 5, 6, 7, and 11. So we have already done this thing. Now we have to find this value of Legendre symbol. So because these are quadratic residues, and by definition, A upon P has value of 1 for A to be quadratic residue of 2. So these are all quadratic residues. That means 1 upon 13, 3 upon 13, 4 upon 13, 9 upon 13, 10 upon 13, 12 upon 13. They all have value of 1. And these all are quadratic non-residues, so they will have all value minus 1. Next, we have these properties of Legendre symbol. So if you have a prime P and the A and B, they are integers, then these are properties. If A is congruent to B mod P, then A upon P is equal to B upon P. The symbols have same value if these two numbers are congruent. And A square upon P, this is equal to 1. A upon P is congruent to A to the power P minus 1 upon 2. A B upon P is equal to A upon P into B upon P. 1 upon P is 1. And minus 1 upon P is minus 1 to the power P minus 1 upon 2. And A B square upon P is equal to A upon P and B square upon P. And B square upon P from this thing will be 1. So this is equal to A upon P. Next we have this result. It says that if P is odd prime, then summation of all the Legendre values A upon P, where A line is from 0 to P minus 1, then this summation has value 0. And hence there are precisely P minus 1 upon 2 quadratic residues and P minus 1 upon 2 quadratic non-residues. Because what you are doing, you are here adding all the values of Legendre symbols. That means if this is 0, that means you have half of the values are positive and half of the values are with same value but negative sign. So that means you have exactly P minus 1 upon 2 quadratic residues and exactly half, that is P minus 1 upon 2 quadratic non-residues. Next we have Gauss lemma. Let P be a odd prime and A and P they are relatively prime if n denotes the number of integers in this set A into A, 3A, P minus 1 upon 2 into A, whose remainders upon division by P exceeds P upon 2. Then this Legendre symbol A upon P has value minus 1 to the power n. Next, this is the result where we are finding the value of this Legendre symbol 2 upon P. So if P is odd prime, then this Legendre symbol is equal to 1, has value 1. If P is congruent to 1 modulo 8 or P is congruent to 7 modulo, and it has value minus 1 if P is congruent to 3 mod 8 or P is congruent to 5 mod 8. This is the corollary to this result. It says that if P is a odd prime, then this value 2 upon P will be minus 1 to the power P square minus 1 upon 8. Next we have quadratic reciprocity law. So if the Legendre symbol P upon Q and Q upon P, how they are related. This is given here. So if P and Q they are distinct odd primes, then P upon Q into Q upon P, the product of these two Legendre symbols is equal to minus 1 to the power P minus 1 upon 2 into Q minus 1 upon 2. Here is the corollary. It says that this product is equal to 1 if P is congruent to 1 mod 4 or Q is congruent to 1 mod 4, and it has value minus 1 if P and Q both are congruent to 3 mod 4. This is another corollary. This P upon Q, this Legendre symbol is equal to Q upon P if P is congruent to 1 mod 4 or Q is congruent to 1 mod 4, and it is equal to minus Q upon P if P and Q both are congruent to 3 mod 4. Next comes the cryptography. So, what is cryptography? Cryptography is the study of methods of sending messages in disguised form so that only the intended recipient can remove the disguise and read the message. So, you just want to hide your message so that only the intended recipient to whomsoever you want to read the message, only that person can read the message, not the third party. So, all these methods we are going to study in cryptography. So cryptography is a method of protecting the information and communications through the use of codes so that only those for whom the information is intended can read the message and you can process it. This prefix script means hidden or vault and the suffix graphy means writing. So you are writing hidden messages. Cryptology is the study of codes, both creating and solving them. Cryptography is the study of creating codes. Cryptanalysis is the art of surreptitiously revealing the contents of coded messages and breaking the codes that were not intended for you as a recipe. That means we are breaking a system to read that message, and that message is not for us. So that is under cryptanalysis. So first cipher is Caesar cipher. Cipher means that a system where you are going to see how to hide a message, how to unhide a message. That. So the first cipher was introduced by Caesar. So what is Caesar cipher? Here we are using the alphabets A to Z, and we are replacing the original message by these alphabets only. But how do we replace? Just see. So this above thing, the alphabets they are plain text. The lower line, this is hypertext. So if you have A in plain text, then that will be replaced by D. So what we are doing, we are going three steps ahead. So if A after A, B, C, D. That means you are going three steps more. So forward. So that means your ciphertext is plain text plus three steps ahead, whatever the alphabet is. So C that means ciphertext and P that means plain text. That's your original message. So your C is congruent to P plus 3 modulo 26 because you have 0 to 25 we have numbered from A to Z as 0 to 25. They are 26 in number. So we have mod 26. So C is congruent to P plus 3 mod 26. Inside the cipher, it's a linear cipher. In this crypto system, the communicating parties agree on an easily remembered word or phrase. This word is called keyword and it is repeated to mean the plain text as many times as necessary to complete your plain text. And the message is then enciphered by adding modulo 26 each plain text number to the one immediately beneath it. So if you have this plain text, attack at once and the keyword is ready. So for the word keyword ready, the numerical equivalents are this 17, 04, 00, 03 and 24. So what we are doing, we just replace the repetition of the keyword sequence below the numerical equivalent in the plain text like this. You just add these numbers and then take modulo 26 and the number this we have for for 17 the corresponding letter is R, for 23 the corresponding letter is X and so on. So this is how we apply linear cipher. The modification of binary cipher or auto key cipher, it is the modified cipher. The concept of auto key was used in this cipher. This approach makes use of plain text message itself in constructing the encryption key. So we start with a short seed or a primer, generally a single letter that followed by the plain text message. So if you have this message, one if by dawn, and encrypt the plain text using the auto key or the seed key letter K. So what we are doing, just writing K and then after that the plain text one if I don't. Then you just write this message below this message, add the numerical equivalents, take module 26 and you are done. So this becomes the ciphertext. So how do we decrypt in auto key cipher? So if the digital equivalents of plain text are P1, P2, Pn and ciphertext C1, C2, Cn and if S indicates the seed, then the first plain text number will be P1 is equal to C1 minus S, the seed. So here it was K, so 24 minus 10, that is 14, mod of 26. And after that, the deciphering transformation becomes Pk is equal to Ck minus Pk minus 1, mod 26, K lies from 0 to n, 2 to n. So P2 will be 1 minus 14, that is minus 13, which is congruent to 13 mod 26. P3 will be 17 minus 13, which is 4 mod 26. So this is how we decrypt. Next is important cipher, that is Hill cipher. So it was developed by Lester Hill, so it is named as Hill cipher. So what do we do in this? If you have what in this cipher we divide the whole plain text into blocks. So blocks of 2 letters each. So if you in first block if you have P1 P2, then the corresponding C1 C2 will be C1 congruent to A1 AP1 plus BP2 mod 26, and C2 is congruent to CP1 plus DP2 mod 26. So, and this is the encryption method. And how do we decrypt? To permit decipherment, the four coefficients A, B, C, D, they are to be selected in such a way that GCD of AD minus BC and 26, that is 1. So this thing you have to remember. And this is for deciphering only, not for encryption. Next, we have another important algorithm, that is RSA algorithm. It was developed by three mathematicians, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. So this is called RSA algorithm. So here it has three parts. First is key generation, then encryption, and then decryption. So let us see the first part. So what we are doing, we are selecting two prime numbers P and Q, different prime numbers, and calculate n, which is the product of these two prime numbers. Next step, calculate phi n, p minus 1 into q minus 1, because both are prime. So phi n will be p minus 1 into q minus 1. Next, you have to select an integer e between 1 and phi n, such that phi n and e are relatively prime. So first, then you have found this e. After that, you calculate d, such that de is congruent to 1 mod phi n. That means d is the inverse of e under mod of phi n. So this E and this becomes a public key, and D and that becomes the private. So the public key is known to everyone, and the private key is known to the recipient. So this is the key generation. Then the encryption part, how do we encrypt the plain text? So if you have message M, then you find its numerical equivalent, and you calculates the power E, which we have found here. Then m to the power e will give you C, the ciphertext. And once you have C, then how do we decrypt it? You just take the d power of C, because d is the inverse of e. So if you find C to the power d, then you will have your plain text back. So, but this RSA algorithm, it is very strong, because if you have this value n and these primes are of hundreds of digits, then finding p and q is nearly impossible. So this is a strong algorithm. So once we are done with all these, we have also done different crypto systems. So for that, you can see the cryptography module, and in different lectures we have covered different modules, the cryptographic systems. So another thing we have here is Pythagorean triple. So how do we define a Pythagorean triple? Pythagorean triple is a set of three integers x, y, z, such that x square plus y square is equal to z square. And this triple is called primitive triple if x, y, z they are relatively prime. So you already know what is the Pythagoras theorem. So for a right triangle, the hypotenuse square is equal to perpendicular square plus base square. So that thing, that means the values of x, y, z, which just satisfies the Pythagoras theorem. They are Pythagorean triple. You can say like that. So when searching for integer solutions of this equation, a square plus b square is equal to c square. This equation is a Diophantine equation. Thus, Pythagorean triple are among the oldest known solutions of nonlinear Diophantine equations. And the best known example of primitive Pythagorean triple are 3, 4, 5, 5, 12, 13, whereas the less obvious one is 12, 35, 37. So any Pythagorean triple can be obtained from a primitive triple upon multiplying by a suitable non-zero integer. Now this is the characterization of all primitive Pythagorean triples. How do we find this result? Shows that. So all the solutions of the Pythagorean equation x square plus y square is equal to z square satisfying the condition this GCD of x, y, z 1 and 2 divides x, y, z all are greater than 0 are given by x is equal to 2st, y is equal to s square minus t square and z is equal to s square plus t square. So for integers s greater than t greater than 0 such that s and t are relatively prime and s is not congruent to t not congruent. So this is the characterization of primitive Pythagorean triples. Next is this result say that the radius of the inscribed circle of a Pythagorean triangle. So you have a right triangle, Pythagorean triangle, and you have a circle inscribed in that triangle. Then the radius of that circle is always an integer. Now, how to find the Pythagorean triples? This is very important. In Pythagorean triple x, y, z, z is always an odd integer and out of x and y, one is odd and another is even. So these are Pythagorean triples, for example. Now, there is a trick to find Pythagorean triples when x is odd. Let x is 5. Then how to find this triplet? First of all, you find the square of x. And so here x is 5, so it will be 25. Then divided by 2, so this is 2.5. Then your y will be 12, z will be the next number, that is 13. So 5, 12, 13. This is Pythagorean triple. So whenever x is odd, you can just follow these steps to find the Pythagorean triple. And whenever x is even, then what we are doing? If x is even, then first you divide it by 2, then find its square. So x is 8, dividing it by 2 gives you 4, and square of 4 is 16. Then take y and z as 1 less and 1 more than the value of x. So 1 less is 15 and z will be 1 more, that is 17. So Pythagorean triple is 8, 15, 17. So this is how you find the Pythagorean triple. Next we have Fibonacci numbers. So what are Fibonacci numbers? So these are named after the mathematician Fibonacci. So his father's name was Fibonacci, so he wrote under that name. So in mathematics, the Fibonacci numbers commonly denoted by Fn, they form a sequence called Fibonacci sequence, such that each number is the sum of previous two numbers. So that is f1, f2, that is 1, and fn is fn minus 1 plus fn minus 2, for n is greater than 1. Such sequences in which from a certain point on every term can be represented as a linear combination of preceding terms are said to be recursive sequences. Then, and this Fibonacci sequence is the first known recursive sequence in mathematical world. So an important characteristic of the sequence is the fact that the ratio between any number and the previous one in the series that tends towards a well-defined value, and that is 1.618. And this is the golden ratio or the golden section that frequently occurs in nature. So golden ratio is denoted by phi. So this is how they are related. Then this result says that the Fibonacci sequence they grow rapidly. So if you have n greater than or equal to 1, then u 5 n plus 2 that is greater than 10 to the power n. This is to be noted that the successive Fibonacci numbers are relatively prime. The greatest common divisor of two Fibonacci numbers is itself a Fibonacci number. These are some of the examples of Fibonacci sequences they occur. So this is a Pascal triangle. Here this 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. This is a Fibonacci sequence. this is a tree here. If you find these count these stems, then this 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. This is a Fibonacci tree. It becomes a Fibonacci sequence. So in this rectangle here also you can see a Fibonacci sequence. This 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And this, if you just, so what we are doing here, first we are taking square of side 1, then another square of side 1, then you add 1 plus 1, that means then again we are taking a square of 2 by 2, then 1 plus 2 is 3, so square of 3 by 3, then 3 plus 2 is 5, so this, then 3 plus 5 is 8, then this. So this becomes a Fibonacci sequence. So a tiling with squares whose side lengths are successive Fibonacci numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 21. This is a Fibonacci spiral and it comes from here only. So what we are doing here, this is an approximation of the golden spiral created by drawing circular arcs connecting the opposite corners of squares in the Fibonacci tiling. So we are just connecting the opposite squares by curved line. So by a circular arc. So you just take this corner and this corner diagonally, connect them with an arc, then another square, connect their corners also, and this thing you are doing for every square. So you just get a spiral like this, and that spiral is called Fibonacci spiral. And this Fibonacci spiral connect. This occurs in nature in numerous things. So this is a picture and it is divided in 9 parts, 3 by 3 rectangles. So whenever you have a picture and you divide it in 3 by 3 parts, so and wherever you have these intersections, you place the most important part of that picture there, then that picture will be very attractive. That is, this is called the rule of thirds. In photography, the photographers, they use this thing there. So here also this becomes a Fibonacci spiral. So this, the major thing of this photograph is coming in this, inside this spiral, and on the lines and their intersections. These are two pictures, and this one is edited without, this is cropped without using the rule of thirds. So once again I'm telling you what is rule of thirds. Rule of thirds means you have a picture, you just divide into 3 by 3 squares or rectangles. uh, so we were here, so we have divided into just 3 by 3 matrix like this. Then you just put the most important part at the intersection and the lines of this. Then this picture is more attractive than this picture, as you can see. So the photographers, that's why they use the rule of thirds. Now, what is the connection between the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence? So, as I told you that if you find the ratio of the numbers in Fibonacci sequence, then that there is a sequence which converges to the golden ratio, the number 1.61. So it might seem totally unrelated, but you can check this out. Let's create a new sequence of numbers by dividing each number in the Fibonacci sequence by previous number in this sequence. So remember this sequence. This is Fibonacci sequence. So if you divide 1 by 1, it is 1, 2 by 1, it is 2, 3 by 2, it is 1.5, and so to 144.89, this is 1.679. So the resulting sequence is this. So here you can see that this sequence is approaching towards a golden ratio. Next we have some examples. where Fibonacci sequences occur in nature. So here different pictures. Here this person is bending, and here it becomes a Fibonacci spiral. Here it has Fibonacci spiral. In the thumb, you have a Fibonacci spiral. So wherever you have Fibonacci spiral, then that things gives you beauty, the perfection. It comes from golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral. So that rule of thirds that we have already seen, let us see that again. The rule of thirds is a rule of thumb or guideline which applies to the process of composing visual images such as designs, films, paintings, and photos. So this is all in today's lecture. What we have done, we have just covered most of the important topics of all the modules that we have covered till now, so that you can see every topic in connection to each other. So from one to the last, how we are coming connecting each and everything to each other. So this way, these are all the things which we have covered. Then first divisibility theory, then primes, then congruences, Fermat's theorem, number theoretic functions, then Fermat's theorem, its generalization, primitive roots, quadratic reciprocity law. Then we have taken cryptography, nonlinear Diophantine equation, that is Pythagorean integers, and then Fibonacci. So all these things are connected. So these are the references that we have used. Thank you.